Can I hear him?
Well, my question is, if you say we should grow the economy and make more money, the question is, we already have spent 82% in recurrent expenditure. How does that amount to stopping some of these excesses, or should I say leakages, as I put it in the report?
Yeah, I've always said that whether we like it or not, if the cow that gets the milk you consume every morning is not actually the cow in your house, but cow elsewhere, you will not care about what the cow feeds on and how the cow is grown, how the cow is maintained. So I've always maintained that unless there's a law that says that, because Okey-Nwagbara is saying 2% every year will be the reduction from recurrent to capital. But if we do what China did in 1978, which is drastically downsizing the cost of running government, we can't do that because those who are supposed to do that are already in government, and that will affect them, so they will not do that. So, but I am saying, instead of going towards that, why not we find a way to grow our economy in a way that the cost of running government becomes minimal? Because that's the only way out. Let's be practical here, because it is easy to say we have to reduce leakages. But who will do that? Those in government will not do it, because they're already the beneficiaries. So, you see, I'm trying to be practical. Why not we find a way to grow ourselves out of this problem? And what I've been suggesting is, we must find a way to exit WTO. We must find a way to borrow money externally at a very low cost, maybe LIBOR at a LIBOR rate, so that at less than 1% we borrow this money. We can use the money to fix our infrastructure deficit, which is about $250 billion, so that we grow our GDP, which is about $280 billion, to 400, 500. Then small businesses will now grow the economy, create jobs and things like that. So that is my take on it. I don't want to dwell on how to stop leakages, because it is practically impossible. Because this country has about 540 agencies. Now some of them have overlapping functions, and you cannot stop them. The Orasanyas led the commission, presidential commission.
I think just
has done everything to make sure we downsize.
What I'm saying in essence, I hope you really can hear me, is this doesn't really amount to stopping all of this. Now, if you say we should also be thinking of how to borrow more money, we're not talking about paucity of funds now. We're talking about debt, non-debt, and transfers amounting to 3.38 trillion naira, which is about 82% of recurrent expenditure. We're trying to see how we can stop all of this tradition, which doesn't actually amount to development. So getting more money outside the country can't stop this, can it?
Suleiman, I think I can understand your sentiment, and I have the same sentiment you have. I used to have the same sentiment you have, but we must grow this economy. I can agree with you that, for example, in 2010, the budget was 4.6 trillion, and the capital was 1.8 trillion. In 2013, we have 4.92 trillion, and we have a capital 1.5 trillion, which means we have lost 300 billion. So we are not actually going forward, we are going backward. But let's be factual here. How do we solve this problem? Do we really downsize? If we have to downsize, then we have to downsize. Then we come with practical solutions to downsize. But if we really want to grow this economy so that we start seeing employment, we must do something we are supposed to do. And what I'm suggesting is that let's keep internally generated revenue for running recurrent, and then take externally generated revenue for running a capital expenditure. That is the only thing we can do. And of course, also, we can borrow money externally, because there's nothing wrong with borrowing unless you borrow to invest in recurrent. But if you borrow to invest in the productive sector of the economy, the return on investment to be so high enough to actually cancel the cost of the borrowing. So that is my take on this. I don't know, because unless we have to have a new system where the National Assembly will no longer appropriate their own part of the budget, where there will be a peg on how much the executive spends, and where we are going to do forensic personnel auditing of our ministries, agencies, departments and agencies, so that we know actually what are we spending on. Is there any productivity result in all the money we spend on the civil service and on the bloated government? Unless we do that, there's no way we can cut down on the recurrent expenditure. After all, it was Obasanjo, while he was in office, that came up with a monetization policy. That monetization policy, as of today, is not working. So I don't know what other measures you think we can take. The only measures we could take now is to grow the economy, grow it out of this allocation, and becomes revenue, income tax and the corporate tax driven revenue.
Some people say that, you know, some of the things you already mentioned, that the federal government is already on it. They too are worried about the cost of governance. The Minister for Finance has talked about how they're sanitizing the federal ministries and parastatals. They're going through them to see if they can remove ghost workers. The results so far so good. They've said they've been able to save over 2 billion naira in terms of, you know, in terms of monies that they spend on salaries. And then there's also the Aran Sanye report, you know, which seeks to merge ministries and parastatals. These are some of the measures that the federal government is taking. Are you convinced that some of these things can work?
I have no problem with that, because our situation is such a messy situation. But I am of the opinion that while we are doing this taking these small measures, we must grow the economy. We must grow the economy so the economy will become productive, so the economy will exit from oil-based revenue. That is my only take on. That is what I have been suggesting. Because at the end of the day, even if we reduce recurrent, you still see that, okay, let's have recurrent. Then we are talking about 50-50, which means about 15 billion is now spent on capital. Our deficit, capital deficit, is about 250 billion. So it will not make the change. It will not actually drastically change the situation. I am not against the changes government is taking, even though they are not drastic enough. But what I want us to do is to grow this economy by the real sector. Not grow the economy, is to continue to keep the economy on oil-generated revenue. If we can grow the economy through the real sector, small businesses, then our economy will be a diversified industrial economy. And this issue of leakages will actually gradually reduce. Because he who pays the piper calls the tune. If I have to pay tax and I see government spending out of proportion, I could now oppose government. I could now take government to court. I could now do certain things not to pay tax. And when I don't pay tax, government will be forced to streamline. So that's what I've been saying. I'm not saying that they're not taking some measures, but the measures, notwithstanding the measures, we have to find a way to grow the economy and move it away from oil-based revenue generation to small business, large business, income tax-based revenue generation. And of course, and you know that even the agencies of government that generate a lot of revenue are not actually giving the revenue to the federal government. That was why recently, in February this year, the National Assembly, the House of Rep, Commission on Finance, actually called these agencies, including NNPC and even Central Bank, to discover that they remit about 0.1% of what they generate. And in most countries, developed countries, it is the internally generated revenue that is spent on recurrent. So that is the area we would have gone. We would have reduced the way, we would have made it difficult for these agencies to generate revenue and spend the revenue, especially because the revenue they spend is supposed to be appropriated by the National Assembly. But this revenue even though they appropriate revenue from the National Assembly, they still go about to keep the money because Section 22(1) and Section 22(2) of the Fiscal Responsibility Act allows them to do that. Because it said it's 1/5 of the surplus you generate every year. So they reduce the surplus, what they call surplus, to almost zero. So they remit nothing to federal government. For example, between 2009 and 2011, it was discovered that NNPC generated about 6 trillion, and they remitted zero cash to the consolidated federation account, federal account. Sorry. So what are we talking about here? Because the leakages are there, and the only way to solve the leakages is to reframe the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and for government to grow the economy out of the present oil-based revenue generation.
You've talked about building infrastructure, and that, you know, for us to be able to grow out of that oil-based economy, we have to invest a lot in infrastructure, and it would seem that we don't even have enough in that capital. Talk about how our budget goes to affect our current budgeting system, which some people say is not sustainable, that we cannot, you know, build long-term or have long-term investment in the capital segment with the kind of budget that we operate. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that, because we budget for consumption. We don't budget for growth and development. I agree with you. There's no doubt about that. And the same issue we are talking about, maybe we are talking in different tones. I think, unless, as I said, we grow this economy out of the present source of revenue, then the revenue of the government will remain small. So I think at the end of the day, what I have been suggesting is, let's find a way to borrow money from countries like China and fix the money we borrow on power generation. Because Nigeria, with 170 million people generating about 4.5 million megawatts, is too low even for few cities to have enough power. South Africa, with a 50 million population, generates 41 or 45,000 megawatts. So, and China, being the country in the world that generates more electricity with 1,141,000 megawatts, can help us generate about between 50 and 100 megawatts, because the game changer is power. If we can generate power enough to power this economy, our small businesses will quickly take up. We find themselves in a competitive situation, and they will go back to work. And when they go back to work, they create jobs and things like that. But I have always insisted that our fiscal and monetary policies have to be restructured so that all these things will eventually happen.
All right, Mr. Odili Okey-Nwagbara, an economist, thank you very much indeed for speaking with us today on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for having me.
We'll return after the break. Please join us again.